Hi folks, welcome to RJA Impact. I'm going to relay a series of events that took place over 25 years ago, together with information on the people involved. Now the facts are very well known and there is a lot of background on the perpetrator. As you'll see, in this case the mystery is wrapped up in why the events took place. This is actually very speculative, but I'll provide enough detail and background that perhaps you can provide your own conjectures on the why. Port Arthur is located about 97 kilometres 60 miles southeast of the state capital Hobart on Tasmania, an island south of Australia. It's a beautiful site. The drive from Hobart is incredibly scenic, and as you can see in the images here, historic buildings built across the seafront make for a dramatic and evocative panorama. It was originally built as a place to incarcerate criminals transported from the UK and mainland Australia. There were 11 penal sites altogether originally, and collectively these are recognised by the World Heritage and UNESCO. The conditions of the prisoners housed there was considered to be one of the, if not the most brutal regime in Australia. Our story starts over 100 years since those days, on the 28th of April 1996. I'll go through a chain of events with you, and afterwards we'll unpack some of the reasons that the events you're about to hear of took place. Try to understand some of the motivations of the principle involved and the aftermath which rocked Australian society. Sunday, April the 28th, 1996. It was about 1:30 p.m. on a fine Sunday in April 1996. The fine weather meant a busy day for tourists and visitors to what was by then one of the premier attractions in Australia. By that time in the afternoon, there were around 500 visitors in the general area. A man entered the Broad Arrow Cafe, which is located on the grounds of the historic penal colony, and even after the busy lunch period, there were still around 60 guests inside. He didn't stand out much to the people inside, despite his distinctive long blonde hair, although some people remember him saying, "There's a lot of wasps about today," apparently to no one in particular. He took a meal and went to the balcony area, and after a few minutes more, while eating his lunch, he apparently made another comment about the lack of Japanese tourists. Such banal things to say given what was just about to come. Once he'd finished eating, he went back inside and moved towards the back of the cafe. Calmly and methodically, he set up a video camera on a vacant table. He hoisted his blue duffel bag onto the table beside it. Once he'd done this, he spent several minutes just standing there, staring at one group of people eating, and then staring at an Asian couple, also sitting at a nearby table. Before anyone knew anything, he took out a Colt AR-15 SP1 carbine semi-automatic rifle from the bag and, firing from the hip, shot at the Asian couple, shooting the man through the neck and killing him instantly. He swung the rifle towards the man's partner and shot her through the head, killing her also. He then turned his attention to the group of people who had been eating. Taking his time to raise the rifle to his shoulder, he shot at Mick Sargent. The shot grazed his head and knocked him to the ground. Before anyone could raise any alarm, he'd turned to Mick's girlfriend and shot her through the head. At this point, in only a few seconds, he'd claimed 3 victims. As the patrons of the cafe started to run always for cover, he started to pick out new victims. A brave man near the front of the cafe who started shouting warnings was cut down with a bullet to his neck. Men trying to protect their families were cut down in front of them. One person had a massive head injury when a bullet that passed through one victim went on to hit him too. Some victims died instantly, but others lay there bleeding for hours. The gunman then walked calmly to the front of the cafe, shooting now left and now right. In only 17 seconds, 20 people lay dead and 10 more seriously injured. As he left the cafe, there was complete confusion. There were about 100 people around, and some who had witnessed the carnage were running away, but others, thinking that there was some kind of reenactment going on, had been walking towards the cafe. He calmly changed magazines. When he saw the crowd, the gunman opened fire again, killing several more people. He walked across the car park and came across a tour bus. He shot the driver and the 3 passengers inside. Sadly, a number of tourists who witnessed this and had been waiting to board the bus had crawled underneath the bus for safety. This didn't faze the gunman, who simply squatted down and calmly as you like shot them where they lay. Still in no hurry, he walked over to his car, a yellow Volvo 244, with a surfboard strapped to the roof. The gunman then drove no more than 300 metres down the road to where a woman and her 2 children were walking. He stopped and fired 2 shots, killing the woman and the child she was carrying. The older child fled and tried to hide behind a tree, but he followed her and she was killed with a single shot. He returned to his car and drove no more than another 200 metres to the entrance gate. There he came across a gold BMW, and with 4 more shots, all 4 of its occupants were killed too. He took his time to drag the lifeless bodies from the vehicle before taking it, and after driving a further short distance down the road, stopped beside a couple in a white Toyota. He approached the vehicle and ordered the man out. The man pleaded with him not to shoot, and he was led to the boot of the BMW, where he was ordered to get in, and the gunman shut the lid behind him. Moving to the front driver's side of the vehicle, he shot twice, and the young woman inside was killed instantly. Yet again, the gunman, still with his prisoner in the trunk, got into the BMW and sped off. He was headed towards a bed and breakfast guest house called Seascape. On the way, and as he approached the guest house, he saw another vehicle approach and opened fire on it, this time missing his target. Another vehicle approached, this time a 4-wheel drive Jeep that was being driven by a holidaying couple. Again he shot, twice at first. The first shot hit and entered the bonnet of the Jeep. The second smashed through the windscreen. As he pulled alongside the vehicle, a second volley of shots was sprayed through the vehicle's side windows, showering the occupants with glass and debris and hitting the female driver in the forearm. The man in the passenger seat saw this and tried to control the vehicle, taking hold of the steering wheel. This was unsuccessful as the accelerator cable had been cut by one of the bullets. Only a few seconds later, an estate drove towards them with 2 married couples inside. They were immediately met with a hail of bullets. One of these wounded the driver, and yet, despite this, they managed to move on, and coming across the Jeep, they rescued those occupants before driving on to the Fox and Hounds public house. Yet another vehicle, a Ford, approached him along the Port Arthur main road and saw the gunman standing in the middle of the road brandishing his gun. With great presence of mind, it immediately took evasive action and was able to get away unscathed. The gunman returned to the vehicle and drove up to the Seascape guest house. He first took out his guns from the vehicle before unlocking the boot and letting the man out. He led him at gunpoint into the guest house where he handcuffed him to a stair railing. Then, returning outside, he poured petrol over and in the BMW before setting it alight. We'll come back to the Seascape guest house shortly, but let's relay what was happening in the meantime. It was only about a few minutes after the cafe shooting that police were called. 2 young policemen, named Paul Hyland and Gary Whittle, heard the emergency call and raced to the scene. Hyland was the first to come across the vehicles that had been shot at while the gunman was fleeing, and stopping to investigate, noticed the smoke coming from the now burning BMW in front of the guest house. He quickly returned to his vehicle and, moving it a short distance, set it up as a roadblock across the highway. Whittle arrived at the scene shortly after, and he set up his car a short distance away on the highway, but on the other side of the entrance to the guest house. Effectively between them, they'd created a sealed-off area on the road. 2 more police arrived, and at about that time the BMW exploded. Not really knowing what was happening, this sent them all diving for cover. They moved their vehicles to a safer distance from the cottage, and this happened to be a wise strategy, as while they were doing so, the gunman shot at them several times from the guest house. An impasse ensued, with not much going on with either the police or the gunman until shortly after dark. The police were then released from control of the situation by a special operations group. It was a very difficult situation. In the dark, the police moved slowly to take up flanking positions around the guest house, but radio reception in that area was very poor and they found it nearly impossible to verify their own locations and positions. Hours now started to pass, and as they did, the police started to get a trickle of information on the gunman. He was believed to be Martin Bryant. He was 28 and lived in Newtown, which is a suburb of Hobart. Distinctive in appearance, being tall with long, wiry blonde, almost white hair, and a pale skin complexion, which made some people say he was almost albino in looks. He was considered somewhat slow and below average intelligence. The police realised at this point, as well as the SP1 carbine and AR-15 rifles that he was known to have, he would have access to the guns at the guest house that were held by the owners David and Sally Martin. At this point, given his proximity to those weapons and the lack of cover in approaching the guest house and his holding of 3 hostages, a direct assault was ruled out. After over 6 hours, the operation was handed over to the specialist negotiator Sergeant Terry McCarthy and his team. During those hours and the ones that followed, Bryant had only one demand: to be given a ride in an army helicopter to an airport. Eventually, the conversations came to an end when the batteries died on the phone that Bryant was using. Officers from across Australia were arriving at the scene during that time, and this created the largest single police action in Australia's history. Then, at 8:25 a.m. in the morning, smoke was seen billowing from the building and Bryant was seen running out, his clothing ablaze. As he tore off his clothes, police moved in for the arrest. Bryant suffered burns to his back and buttocks, and after he was captured he was taken to the Royal Hobart Hospital, where he was treated and kept under heavy guard. And in an irony, he was moved to the same hospital where many of his victims had been taken and were fighting for their lives. Back at the cottage, where the blaze was eventually put out, police found more bodies. These were of Seascape's owners Sally and David Martin, as well as that of Glenn Pears, the man who had been taken hostage. Later investigations would find that Glenn had been killed at some point during the negotiations, whereas Sally and David had been killed prior to Bryant and Glenn's arrival. So Sally and David had been the first to be killed on the day that the gunman's killing spree began. This makes it more remarkable that Bryant could take that calm lunch at the cafe on the Sunday before continuing on his killing spree that afternoon. This man, Martin Bryant, had killed 35 men, women and children and injured another 18. We picked up the day from the point at which Bryant entered the Broad Arrow Cafe in the afternoon of the 28th of April. Let's go through Bryant's movements up to that point. He woke up with his girlfriend Petra Wilmot on Clare Street, Hobart. They had a shower together and a slow breakfast. He apparently had set his alarm for 6 a.m. in the morning, and this was the only unusual thing Petra noted about that morning, as he normally never set an alarm. At that time, Petra was around 16 years old, whilst Bryant was 28. She left at some point in the morning for her parents' house, and before he left in his Volvo that morning, he stashed in the boot 2 sets of handcuffs, some sash cord rope, a hunting knife, and several canisters of petrol. Also included was the sports bag, and inside that were the rifles, an AR-15 semi-automatic, an SLR military-style semi-automatic, and a 12-gauge shotgun. He'd apparently been hiding these in 2 unused pianos in the house, and he actually forgot to take another semi-automatic firearm with him, having left it and ammunition in the hallway of the house. Strapped to the roof of his Volvo, incongruously, was a surfboard. He took a number of swigs of Sambuca and at exactly 9:47 a.m. shut the door. He took the road down Clare Street and then onto the Brooker Highway and headed across the Tasman Bridge. He then makes a number of stops as he heads down towards Port Arthur, firstly at a news agency at Midway Point, where he buys a cigarette lighter. Next, 10 minutes later in Sorrel, he stops and buys a bottle of tomato sauce from a supermarket. Another 10 kilometres on, he stops in Fawcett, where he purchased a cup of coffee from a Shell service station. Again, another stop at the Tirana Convict Bakery, where he spoke with the owner as he put $15 of petrol into the Volvo. He'd told the owner he planned to go surfing that day. By now, he's only a few minutes from the Seascape Guest House and 10 minutes from Port Arthur. He headed for the Seascape Guest House, and not much is known about the events that went on inside, except that Bryant shot the owners. Apparently whilst he was there, a couple stopped by and Bryant met them outside. They asked if they could have a look at the accommodation, and Bryant told them that they couldn't because his parents were away and his girlfriend was inside. His demeanour was described as quite rude, and the couple felt uncomfortable. Now they left at around 12:35 p.m. Bryant moved on yet again and stopped by a car that had overheated and talked to the two people, suggesting chillingly that they could come over to Port Arthur for some coffee later. He first drove past the Port Arthur site towards Palmer's Lookout. This is a property owned by the Martins where he met someone he'd known over 15 years previously. He turned around and drove back to the historic site, paid the entrance fee and parked near the water. He took his bag and a video camera out of the car and made his way towards the Broad Arrow Cafe, where the rest of the events of the day began to unfold, as we've already heard. Martin Bryant. Let's take a look at the man and see if we can't find some clues as to what led him to perpetrate the awful events on that Sunday in 1996. As a young boy, he was already considered unusual, and his mother, Carleen Bryant at least, had expressed concerns over his temperament. His father even took early retirement as a dog worker to look after him. When he first got to school, his behaviour meant that the other children kept him at a distance. He had a brief moment of fame when he was interviewed for television as a youngster, when he'd injured himself after playing with fireworks.
Do you think you'll be playing with firecrackers anymore?
Yes.
Don't you think you've learned a lesson from this?
Yes, but I'm still playing with him.
Eventually he was diagnosed with very low intelligence and put into a special school where teachers would comment that he kept himself isolated, as they put it, in his own little world. As he got older, his odd behaviour was expressed in what can only be perceived as a complete lack of either awareness or consideration for dangers. One anecdote that is told is that on one occasion he and a girlfriend had gone off in a dinghy. They'd got marooned in heavy seas off the Bass Strait, and that's the sea that separates Australia mainland with Tasmania. He had a complete lack of any emotion when rescued by a fisherman. Another odd reaction he had was to the apparent suicide of his father, who drowned himself in a dam on the family property. In joining the search for his father, apparently Bryant showed no signs of concern and seemed to indicate he found the whole experience enjoyable. Then, when his father was found, he expressed no emotion on hearing the news. Police actually thought that Bryant knew more about this death than he was letting on. His father was found at the bottom of the dam with a diver's weight belt around his neck. The police did eventually assess the affair as a suicide, as apparently there was a suicide note together with an amount of cash found in a car on Bryant's property. Another incident was relayed by a friend of Bryant's when they were both skin diving together. At one point he jabbed his spear into his friend's hands. Neighbours would say that he used to torment their children by throwing rocks at them. He would just generally cause mayhem in the area, cutting down trees, unmooring boats, destroying vegetable gardens, etc. When he did leave school, very surprisingly, he immediately qualified for a state pension. Why? Well, because his IQ was considered so low, he fitted into a special needs category for state aid. Let's meet another character that features prominently in Bryant's life, Helen Mary Elizabeth Harvey. It was on taking a job for her that really defined his life for the next several years. Who was she? Well, she was a middle-aged woman who happened to be rich and the heiress to the Tattersall Lottery's fortunes. Bryant originally applied for a job as a gardener there to look after Harvey's sprawling estate in Newtown, Hobart. The pair quickly became friends. She apparently lived with at least 20 dogs and 20 cats, and very soon Bryant was helping her with her shopping, and the pair would travel together in luxury cars from her large automobile collection. She bought a farm in around 1991, halfway between Port Arthur and Hobart, and kept miniature horses and pigs on the property. Bryant, and I kid you not, slept with a pig in his bedroom, which soiled the carpet so badly it was forced to be replaced on several occasions. The living conditions became so bad and squalid that the RSPCA, that's an animal welfare society, insisted that the conditions needed to be improved, and 7 skiploads of rubbish were taken from the property as a result. When they were emptied, however, several working televisions, cash and other valuables were found to have been discarded alongside all the filth and debris. How did this relationship progress? Well, it is rumoured that they were more than just friends, if you understand my meaning. Now, Harvey then died in a suspicious car crash, and who do you think inherited the property? No prizes for guessing Bryant. Now, because Bryant's father was named as a trustee for him, while he benefited from the legacy, he had no actual control over the money, so he had to rely on his father to give him funds, etc., all at his father's discretion. Well, what event occurred about a year after Harvey died? Yes, this was when Morris, Bryant's father, was found at the bottom of the dam, as we've already heard. We heard a little bit more about Harvey's death in a documentary that was made about Bryant's life called Martin Bryant's Dark Secrets, and this was by the film company Seven. In it, Mrs. Harvey's neighbour, Barry Featherstone, provided additional chilling details about Bryant's weird behaviour. Brian and Harvey were in the car together when she died. Mr. Featherstone said that Harvey had told him that she had to drive at only 35 kilometres per hour because Bryant had an odd tendency to grab the steering wheel off her while they were driving, often causing the car to crash. He had done this multiple times while she was driving, she said.
One evening, Miss Harvey came in asking for our help to get a car out of the drain.
By the side of the driveway, off the road.
Yeah. And as we was walking back along to her where a car was, she was telling us how he used to grab the steering wheel and put her off the road. Well, her exact words was, one of these days that little bastard's going to kill me.
It's thought that Bryant, the soon-to-be mass murderer, wasn't even questioned in connection with the fatal crash. He told the police that it was Harvey's dogs roaming loose in the car that caused it. Bryant was actually injured in the crash alongside the fatally injured Harvey. Looking at his inheritance, his father left him around $250,000 and Harvey had left him property worth over another $500,000. And don't forget, this is in the early 90s, so that money is worth far more than it is today. Together with his state pension, Bryant was extremely wealthy and could provide for himself pretty much in any lifestyle he desired. Bryant had tried to purchase a farm from David and Sally Martin, the owners of the guest house. In Bryant's own words, I tried to buy the farm off them before and offered them a lot of money, and Mrs. Martin would say to me, I'm never going to sell it. It doesn't matter how much money you offer me, Martin. So I shot them in the head. In some accounts it was actually Bryant's father who tried to buy the guest house, but this couple were clearly on Bryant's radar. In his drawings you can see here how he killed them and left them apparently in bed in the guest house. After the wealth inheritance, Bryant started to blow large sums of money on holidays, lavish shopping sprees, etc. He got into angry altercations with neighbours and apparently had a large collection of pornography, a lot involving bestiality. He apparently also acted inappropriately around underage girls, showing them his pornography. Well, why am I not surprised at this? The Seven documentary actually speculates that if more had been done to investigate Harvey and Morris's death, then a great tragedy could have been avoided, and I'm inclined to agree with this. Remember the duffel sports bag that Bryant had carried his weapons in on the day of the massacre? Well, the shopkeeper remembers him actually measuring out several before choosing the one he bought. Now this, according to police, is clear evidence that the killing spree was planned out in advance and not the outcome of him just snapping somehow on the day itself. Bryant himself, when asked why he did it in interviews following his arrest, said, "I'd really like to help you, but I can't." And this is key to the why question that I posed right at the front of this video. To this day, Bryant has not explained himself in any way that provides any real satisfactory closure. We can get a sense of the character of Bryant from the police video of his interrogation. At this point, he's being asked about the circumstances in which he kidnapped Glenn Pear, who he later killed in the Seascape guest house. It isn't of great quality, but you'll be able to follow with the subtitles.
Saw this car ride by and got held up the person in the car, kidnapped him.
Kidnapped him. How did this guy get in the boot?
I put him in the boot because I had the gun.
Which gun did you have?
I had the
Mr. Warren, hold it up.
AR-15. See, if people didn't do these unfortunate things, you guys wouldn't have a job.
Well, there's a lot of truth in that, man, let me tell you.
That one there? Yes,
Yeah.
that was the one.
This is the one.
It's a sweet little gun. It's so light. How light is it? Yeah.
Can you remember what you said to this fellow?
Hey mate, get out of your car, please. I'm gonna take your car.
And you had this pointed at him, did you?
Yeah, I had it pointed at him.
Now, he originally wanted to plead guilty to the murders, but not guilty on all the attempted murder counts, but changed his mind just before getting to trial, writing this note to his lawyers. What happened when Bryant eventually faced justice in court? The trial began on November the 7th of that year, where clear evidence relating to the killing spree was relayed to court. People described the hideous injuries suffered by themselves and their loved ones, and Bryant was described as a laughing, maniacal fool. Even in court, Bryant smirked and smiled during the proceedings, and on one occasion laughed out loud. Even when the jury handed out its verdict, he continued to smile. For the killing of 35 people and injuring of 23 more, which at the time was the world's worst ever massacre, he was incarcerated for 35 life sentences, plus an additional 1,035 years in jail. Without any possibility of parole, he will die in jail. Where is he now? Well, he's now housed in Hobart's Risdon prison and has been in jail for 26 years. Aged 55 years old, he's obese and apparently a danger to those around him. He's seriously assaulted 4 people since being in jail, including one member of staff who was struck over the head. He likes to kick an AFL ball in the yard when allowed out of his cell and is believed to exchange sexual favours for chocolates. Aftermath. Well, what was the Australian political reaction to this event? It turned out that Bryant had purchased the weapons he used in the attack from a Hobart dealer and without any form of licence requirement. An uproar ensued, with large numbers of the public calling newspapers, press organisations and chat shows etc. demanding that something be done about the gun laws and that they be appraised immediately. It was only days after that politicians met to address the laws, and proposals included complete bans on all automatic and semi-automatic guns. Pro-gun groups lobbied hard against the proposed laws. Despite all the protests, Prime Minister John Howard implemented sweeping reforms on gun ownership, their importation and exportation. His message was simple. Australia had too many guns and they were too easy to get. With an amnesty period for people to hand in their now illegal guns, the government bought back approximately 650,000 privately held guns. They also gave an amnesty for anyone handed in already illegal guns. There's a lot of academic and political debate over whether this reaction has made any impact on gun deaths in Australia since then. The jury appears to still be open on this, but defendants of the reaction point out that Australia has not had any mass spree killings in the 25 plus years since. Well, there lies the tale of Martin Bryant. I don't think I can add anything to the why he went on the killing spree he did, and as I said at the beginning of this video, I think you'll need to make your own mind upon that. As I said, the man himself has given no satisfactory answer. Now, whilst it's important to look at the background and causes of these terrible events, I can't leave this video behind without recognising the 35 men, women and children whose lives were cut tragically short on that awful day. I hope you found this video informative at least. If you could like it and subscribe to the channel, then that would be very much appreciated. Bye for now.